We're going to look at the third telefilm in the $6 Million Man series that was originally broadcast in 1973 and then was retooled into a two-part episode to be part of what became season 1 of the television series. This one was entitled The Solid Gold Kidnapping, and again, this is produced by Glen Larson. It still has more of a James Bond feel than the $6 Million Man feel that we would get in the actual episodes of the series. We did not like the second installment. We did not like Wine, Women, and War, which was the first Glen Larson effort. How did you feel about this one?
This one I think was better than the second one, but worse than the first one. Now, I really liked the first one. I didn't really like the second one. This one was definitely different. It's still not one of my favorites. I'm excited to go into the series if it's better. For
me, I would agree with that. I still think the first TV movie out of the three was the best. And it's ironic, again, because Glen Larson produced so many series that I'm such a fan of. This one was a much stronger effort than the second one. The editing was better, but we still had some of these editing issues that we both kind of called out about the second movie. And there was one point where they're on a plane. They show a plane, and it's obviously B-roll stock footage. You get the cockpit of the plane from the back. You see the pilot's hands from the back, and it's obviously voiceover. They've done voiceover to be able to utilize this footage in the film. And there's, it's some exposition about we got a VIP on board. Then they cut to the guy who's the VIP. Who's this, he's the military advisor to the President of the United States. They cut to him, and he's obviously not in that plane. They show the plane, they show the interior of the plane with all the passengers, and then they do a close-up of him, and the background is not at all, he is not in that plane. And it's like, wow, you obviously felt like you needed to insert this, but it just didn't work. Right. But anyway, the plot of this one concerns, again, this is a James Bond villain kind of thing. Here it's sort of more like Spectre in a sense, where you have kind of a Blofeld character who's the head of this organization, and the organization is trying to kidnap people for money and to make a lot of money for the organization. They even have this world map atlas on the wall with this strange kind of allotment to the continents. It's very strange. But John Vernon plays one of the operatives for the organization, and he's trying to kidnap people. His first kidnapping is foiled by Steve Austin, who is sent into Mexico, and he rescues the person that they kidnapped so they don't get their money for that person. And interestingly, when they're escaping, it's on a helicopter. Right. And John Vernon sort of shoots the ladder, very good shot. He shoots the ladder, and Steve Austin is forced to grab onto the bottom of the helicopter with one arm, and they fly away. And that's noted by another one of the operatives for this organization who sees it. And that becomes important later in the movie. Right.
This one for me was kind of confusing. There were definitely weird edits. I thought that this one was more funny, though.
Yeah, Steve Austin definitely gets he does some really good one-liners here, in the vein of Sean Connery as James Bond, where he would have some good one-liners. Some nice bits where he would come into this hotel all the time, and every time he came into the hotel clerk would turn around and he was a mess. Steve Austin was a mess. One time he was all torn up because he had, been in a car chase. Another time he'd been in the water, so he was soaking wet. And then, Lee Majors would always do a great line delivery of some funny one-liner for the hotel clerk, and that did work very well.
And I liked that. There was a lot of this that was different than what I'm used to.
Well, the other piece of this was, the organization captures this State Department official from the United States, and they're going to sell him to the highest bidder, but they're asking for gold. $1 billion in gold in the meantime. And that ransom is going to be delivered. Oscar Goldman, played by Richard Anderson, of course, is the head of the agency that Steve Austin is working for. And Terry Carter, who would later play Colonel Ty in Battlestar Galactica, is sort of his subordinate. And he's bird-dogging the ransom delivery of the gold. In the meantime, Goldman sends Steve Austin in to kind of infiltrate, and he's kind of the 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot. If he can get the guy out, if he can rescue the guy, they won't have to deliver the money. And so that's how that plays. Now, the other part of that is there's a doctor. She's a scientist, and Elizabeth Ashley, I think, plays the role. I'm not positive. And she's developed this system where they've tried it in animals where they can inject the memory cells of another animal, brain cells from one animal into another, and that second animal can see the memories of the first.
Right.
And they show that with a rat in a maze. The first rat is familiar with the maze, and they inject brain cells from that rat into a rat that's never seen the maze, and it can navigate the maze. So she injects brain cells from that operative I referred to before, the other operative for the organization who was killed in the kidnapping of the State Department official. They inject brain cells from him into her, and she can see his memories, but only piecemeal and patchwork, and she can't process them. So she's working with Steve, giving him bits and pieces, and he's trying to sort this out in order to, rescue the guy. And we even have a rendezvous with a countess, and it's very James Bond fashion where Lee Majors goes off with her and, gets some information from her. It's very, very, very James Bond, but lesser James Bond.
Yeah, this one, kind of, Steve Austin specifically, kind of reminds me of MacGyver. The way that he's like so smart and the way that he figures out things. He reminds me of MacGyver, not necessarily the movie,
right.
But Steve Austin.
And I was going to make that correlation because they're still figuring it out here. But you have the two pieces that work in this are Richard Anderson's Oscar Goldman, who would become like Pete. Right. In MacGyver. And I was actually going to say this before you said it, so it's kind of interesting. And then Steve Austin, who is an operative who works like MacGyver. He's clever, he works things out, he's got some funny one-liners. And their relationship here, whereas they were very much at odds in the second film, they've started to get along here, and you will see in the series they have a relationship and a dynamic very similar to Pete Thornton and MacGyver in the MacGyver television series, the original we're talking about, not the new one. And that, I thought, kind of got developed here. And so we see a little bit more what Steve Austin's character is going to be from this particular movie. And we see a little bit more of what Oscar Goldman is going to be. And when we get into the series, they really focus on that, and that's what drives the series.
Right.
And Steve becomes very likable and very fun. He's not so negative and pessimistic in the series. And he was less so in this movie than he had been in the movie before. So.
And then the last thing was I got confused, especially in the second one. So Steve Austin has his friend, but then like this friend goes away in the second one, and then they kind of went with it in this one. I don't know what happened with that.
Well, I think it's because they were broadcast as individual films.
Right.
And it wasn't a series yet, and it wasn't going to be. So they were just dealing with Steve Austin as a character.
So that's probably why.
So they kind of, abandoned that. Just as I don't know this for a fact because I can't remember, but I doubt we're going to see Terry Carter moving forward as being part of that same agency. I think he was just in there for this film. And Earl Holliman had been the same way in the second film. He was part of it there, but we didn't see him at all in this one. So that's your point. And I think that's, I think it's on the basis of they were telefilms.
Right.
And then when they broke them into two-part episodes and made it the first season of the series, you're right, it doesn't jive. They don't all go together. And especially when they reuse footage that they've used before, it's very obvious because you're watching it one right after the other. Whereas when they were originally broadcast, they were months apart and they were movies. So... anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right, last take.
I'm going to say for this one, in the middle of a see it and a skip it, because there are definitely funny lines, and I like Steve Austin, but the movie is okay.
Right. Well, for the very first one, I gave it a see it. The second one, I gave it a skip it. This one, I'm in the middle, but I am moving more toward a see it. This was a better effort. Still not the right formula, but you could see the seeds of that formula in this movie. So it's, definitely worth checking out if you're a fan, or, if you potentially become a fan of the Bionic Man, you'll want to go back and look at this, because I think this is where it really started to come into, they started to kind of tweak it a little bit. All right, well, we'll be checking out the series after this, and we'll come back and talk about it.